Christophe Egret, is one of the two founding partners at Studio Egret West. We met many years ago working at the Cassidy Taggart Partnership and then later with Will Alsop in London. And we met again in about, I can't remember, it's 2017 or 2018, while our two sons were doing summer schools in London. And I took the opportunity to catch up with old friends and colleagues, and Christophe invited me to lunch in his wonderful office and gave me a copy of his book, Seeking Serendipity, which I understand isn't for sale, but that's what it looks like. And kindly wrote a really nice message inside it for me. One of my boys, Wilf, was at the Bartletts and hating it, but doing a 2-week drawing course. And he came back that afternoon and said he'd been in this office that was super cool. They had a cafe and they served beer and everything. And so I said, what was it called? He said, I don't know. He said, it wasn't Studio Egret West, was it? I said, yeah, that's it. I said, well, have a look on the table. There's a book. And he said, yeah, that's them. I said, well, open it up. And he opened it up and he said, wait, you actually know him? Yeah, so I actually do know Christophe, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to Jersey and to discuss a subject that's really the starting point for all great buildings and great places, rootedness. So over to you, Christophe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming to this talk, and thank you, Mike, for inviting me here. I'm really chuffed to be here. And I remember Mike asking me, would you like to give a talk, and what might you like to talk about? And it has been on my mind. I wanted to start to articulate what it is that drives us, and rootedness, or maybe more simply roots, is I feel a subject that is worth kind of exploring in its richness. But before I get there, I just want to give you a feel of what our studio is like. And 18 years ago, David West and I, we were both at Alsop, and Alsop's kind of life was getting a bit difficult, and we decided to create a new business. David is an urban designer and I'm an architect, and we felt that the two disciplines should never be separated. And so we slowly built a studio. We call it a studio because the idea of a studio is the idea that you all kind of help each other and you discover things, and there's a kind of magic about that. And now we have 70, and the kind of the big thing that happened is architecture and urban design is really important to bring them together. But the magic glue is landscape, the public realm, the space between the buildings. And so, it's really difficult to build landscape architecture because it's a talent that, traditionally was outside of architecture. It was planting, it was gardens and so on. But urban design requires that it's a tougher kind of landscape. And when you bring the three together, you get a magic thing called placemaking, which is sort of, that is what roots are really, it's placemaking. And just quickly, before I go into the meat of projects that kind of dissect the rootedness, I just wanted to show you, this is inside of our studio, this is the main space. David and I sit at the front, maybe like a reception desk, because we want everybody to kind of know where we are and come to us really easily. Everything we do starts with a pen. There's a kind of danger with digital technology that we immediately go to the computer. But there's a directness of painting and of drawing that, Mike, you are familiar with, and Will was also familiar with, and we kind of learned from Will in that sense. And always at the beginning of a project, watercolors, pen, and then there's a looseness because when you want to communicate with people, you want to be able to share a drawing. And the minute it's a computer drawing, it's fixed. It feels a bit more solid. there's a certain flexibility about a sketch. And I'm showing you other sketches by other people in the studio just to explain how it's an important part of our culture to, this is Jarrell's sketches, for instance, and he kind of draws very complex, and he kind of, it's not really architecture, it's really about placemaking, it's about what happens in those different spaces. This is Freddie's sketches, and they're much more like, what's the volume of the building looking like? And then we've got Duncan, who is our director of landscape, who immediately knows how to find the softness of landscapes and so on, and give an impression. And what you'll notice about those drawings is architecture is completely integrated into the landscape. It's not, landscape is not an add-on, it's completely part of it. The other thing is, and I'm trying to convince Mike to get a studio or an office on the ground floor on the high street, because our studio is on the high street and people are cycling by and are looking at the models. But we also use our space as an exhibition space, and the exhibition space is our thought leadership, and our thought leadership is our research on how do you keep industry in the city, how do you deal with play in the urban environment, how do you deal with... Our current exhibition is, this one was about working the future of the office. This one was about how to grow food in an urban environment. And the current one is called Co-Create, and Co-Create is about how to entice people to co-create with us using artificial intelligence, the AI of the Co-Create, to be able to be at the same level as us when arguing about the quality of a building. So say somebody wants, we have to design a health center, they, through AI and through Mid-Journey and other computer systems, they can draw what they mean, and then they are, because let's be frank, architects can so pull the wool over the eyes, what do you say? Yeah. Pull wool over the eyes of, because we control the pen. We control the pen. This is no longer true. Okay, roots. Roots is not just one thing. It is obviously materiality is one way of contextualizing with your neighbors and finding roots in that way. Second life, we were just talking about, let's stop demolishing buildings, let's give them a second life. And sometimes, and particularly now, it's more difficult, but we will get used to it. And there is the modernist era was obsessed with tabula rasa and starting again, and the past was wrong and so on. But we at Studio Egret really feel very strongly that you keep a bit of the past, you project towards the future, and you've got the connection between the past and the future, and that's how it should be. The past is never wrong, it's just, it was what it was then, and then it evolves. You can find roots through community, you can find roots through context. Where are the views, where is the prevailing winds, where is the sun, obviously. That's what traditionally we do as architect. And then there is landscape, and probably landscape is the most fantastic tools to root buildings, and I'll talk about that through a number of projects. And so somehow you'll find me talking about these subjects over and over. And I guess the starting point is Mies van der Rohe, I think that's the Seagram building. Typical, I've got an idea of a building and I'm going to put it in whatever part of New York. And then people felt that they could take that same building and put it in Paris, in London, in some other place, in Buenos Aires. And that for me was like the beginning of losing, like the architecture and the idealism of modernism kind of creating an idea that could be parachuted to different places. But so the reverse is, how can you create a building that feels like it's grown from the ground, that it comes from its roots? And and I guess for 5 years I worked. When I was working at Allsop, I worked on the Peckham Library, and I thought it was a bit of a green L shape that kind of had landed there like an animal had just been dropped off. I didn't feel that it had that strong roots, and I know that at the time people were saying it's not contextual. It doesn't look like the buildings around it. But then over time, I kind of understood that it actually was rooted. That east-west connection was a kind of really big design line that kind of really meant that by lifting the building, it was right that it was in that location. And the children in Peckham were able to see the skyline of London, which is 7 or 8 miles away, and be connected to the city. And they might not even know where the city might be, but when they went to the children's library, they did. And so on, and little by, and then it became an iconic part of Peckham, and therefore, in a way, and then the market was underneath the library, and so through a series of strange happening by the point of lifting the building, you actually created those interesting roots. So suddenly, contextualism didn't have to be looky-likey kind of an approach. And so I'm going to try and take you through a number of projects, and you'll see some are about materials, some are about context, some are about landscape. The first one was about the shawl, which it was an Olympic project. So during the Olympics 2012, the Stratford Centre, which was facing the grandstairs taking you to the Olympic Village, was kind of, it was the back of the shopping centre, and it was the main car park. And desperately, the council, Tower Hamlets, said, "Oh, can you plant some trees really quickly, and it'll be." And we said, "But you've only got 6 months, and they won't grow in time, and there's cables in the ground and so on. But we'll make some titanium trees that move in the wind." So, very, very quickly at very high speed, we did that. I think I'm using this analogy because it looked like trees, and I thought it was a good way of starting a talk. But it's a lovely material. They haven't aged at all, and that the curves of the titanium leaves have been dipped into different electrolytic compounds with different voltage, and you get different colors of titanium from that process, which is, I think, fascinating. On a slightly more serious project, Park Hill. Park Hill is the very famous social housing of the 60s in Park Hill, which at the 11th hour was saved from demolition by the council and by English Heritage deciding to give it a 2-star listed status. And Urban Splash, who are the big Manchester developer, took it on as a kind of real challenge. And it has, it still is, but it was also at the time an extraordinary translation of Corbusier's idea of streets in the sky and of social housing, and it was post-war, and comparatively people were living in 2 up, 2 down in sort of really sad sort of street conditions, sanitary conditions. But it was still a building that was designed in the mind, and it was a modular. The architect, which I had the opportunity to meet, said we never drew an elevation. We sorted out the facade of the module, and then we repeated the module, and then we turn 130 degrees, and then we continue, and then we change the corridor position. But it was a mental game, practically like a game of Lego. And so the first thing that we did, this is before and after, and so you see we went right back to the structure. We gave more light, but the key thing we did is we landed the building and we really spent most of our time on the landscape. And so suddenly the building had lanes and apertures and paths to the station and places to play and so on. And immediately it was grounded. We went right back to the structure so that we could put proper double glazing, kind of really create, and we created more color. There was a kind of slightly dour quality of the original building. And I know for a fact that it was shortlisted for Sterling Prize, and because we used vivid colors, we were told that we had done the wrong thing. I still feel, and Urban Splash also think that we needed, for people to want to move to Park Hill, we needed to make a step change, and the step change needed to be bold. And then suddenly you've got this wonderful situation that, this is when it's just finished, and then suddenly you've got the curtains and the balconies are being occupied and the plants are growing, and then suddenly you have the ice cream van that comes along, and then there's a community, and there's three levels of offices, and now it's a really wonderfully vibrant place with a lane rather than a straight line, beautiful landscape, a sense of arrival. And these are parts of the things that we think about when we're thinking about how to play something. And we had to reinstate all the things that were in the 60s but then kind of slowly disappeared, like nurseries, like pubs, like kitchens for cooking and so on. And then we widened the street a little bit to create a community around 4 doors. And then we created offices, and now other architects have done other phases. So it's no longer one hand that has made the changes to Park Hill. It's a number of hands. A similar project called the Old Vinyl Factory is where his master's voice used to record the Beatles and the kind of the 1960s music. So it was a kind of town within Hayes, where you had a boiler room, you had a electricity power, you had a little train inside it. And this was a kind of extraordinary moment, and it was the kind of famous dog that was, and in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s it was buzzing, and then it just fell apart. The record industry fell apart. Those buildings were no longer flavor of the month. And so we inherited this space. And a developer came to us and said, it's a really brilliant site, and we're going to put, I can't remember how many, 350 car parking spaces on the ground. And we said, don't do that. I mean, even the name London Gate was just a terrible name. And so suddenly we looked at the history of the site. We looked at who had recorded there. We looked at the titles of the song. We looked at the infrastructure. We talked to people around there. And we looked at the plans and the names of the buildings. So suddenly you have the assembly building, the record store, the cabinet making building, where they made the cabinets with the record players and you could have a radio and so on, the shipping building, the powerhouse, the boiler house. And already by not calling it London Gate, but giving it some particular names, and by not filling the ground floor with car parking, but putting buildings and putting 2 multi-story car parks, the music box and the veneer room, the veneer box, veneer store, we were able to get more development. We brought the dog back. We didn't bring the dog. You and I, the developer, had an artist make the dog and put it in the middle. And at the beginning we were like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And then, it's immediately friendly and immediately embracing. We brought the gramophones back. We put the multi-story car park. The multi-story car park has this giant image of fans of the Beatles screaming their heads off, and so really kind of connecting with the history of the site. And then some of the old existing buildings turned into offices. The powerhouse turned into a co-working environment. and the boiler house becoming at the time the tallest inclined timber residential home. You couldn't do that anymore post Grenfell, but it was our pride at the time of building a timber building for residential uses. This is the interior. You can see where I'm going. It's sort of there's always the same idea. This was Caxton Works, which is in Canning Town, and it was this wonderful environment of low-rise industrial buildings. And the tradition is you move the industry out of the edge of the city, further away, further away, further away. And there will be a day when getting an MOT, you'll have to drive 2 hours out of your own city to be able to find the warehouse space to do that. And so part of our thinking was that how can we keep industry in the environment? And typically when you want to build more homes, you say, oh, it's not compatible. So we invited, while we were designing, we invited groups of people, the House of Fairy Tale that kind of helps children to learn through telling stories. We went through consultation, obviously. We sketching, and the first sketches that we did were about how to keep a datum of 2 or 3 stories of industry at the base of the building and then build above it. And so obviously we were not going to get the panel beaters that make too much noise, but the printers and the bamboo bicycle makers and the this and so on, and then build something above that. And that led to some CGIs that kind of started to get the vibe of the Corten fabric on the outside and then the brick buildings for the residential above. And that became a 17-story building meeting the demands of housing next to a train station. And then having, at first I think the key was to make it affordable, so affordable industrial spaces, to make them tough because we were still in an environment that was kind of quite tough. So you could close everything at nighttime and open everything during the day. And we're super proud because there is the bamboo bicycle maker, there is the bread maker, there is it's not a gym, it's a proper climbing wall kind of environment, and then these guys have a brewery that makes beer, local beer. New Bermondsey is obviously in Bermondsey, sort of London Bridge station is about 7 minutes away. There's a new station along here, and this is a project that we've had on our drawing boards for over 12 years, and we are now beginning to build these three towers along here. But what is interesting here is that in the middle of all this is a stadium, and on the edges of all of this is railway. So those who don't know the site don't know where it is. So we looked at the maps of the site. We looked at it's called Surrey Canal Road because there used to be a canal there, and the timber would come along, and there was changes of level because of the canal and the towpath. And we really kind of embraced the recycling factory, the stadium, the big arches, the smaller arches, and we felt like we were surrounded by this kind of datum that's about 3 stories tall that kind of encircles the space. And we were also in a kind of post-Olympic environment where sport was really kind of the theme that connected the main uses at ground level. And so we developed a master plan, which I won't go into too much detail, other than to say that the way we found the routes was to find a datum of 3 levels that was really active and generous in terms of public uses, in terms of community uses, and then build above. So like in the industry where we put the first 2 stories and then a datum above, we created a new datum, which you'll see in a second. And then the stadium was being planned by others on the edge, and we integrated the stadium. But the three towers, which are called Orion Towers, have that 1, 2, 3-story datum, and then they have amenity space that connects all three towers together. And so there's a kind of hill underneath, and then there is these three buildings that are identical. 2 of them are private, and 1 of them is affordable. You can't tell the difference between the three. There is greenery that's kind of cascading across this kind of organic fabric, and that undulation is actually hiding an auditorium, a space that will be there for 800 people. And that is the reason why we have an exoskeleton structure that allows us to avoid having columns right through the auditorium. And then above it is the landscape kind of cascades up and kind of brings, often you have a tower and then it hits the ground and there's no in-between spaces. So we developed this structure with Arab. We developed some really efficient plans with all the flats being dual aspect. There's no point in tall buildings to have balconies, so we created winter gardens, and then we've created this kind of tough base that has this kind of easy on the eye, in the sense that it doesn't abruptly go up. It sort of stands lightly on its legs. A few images. I'm aware of time. When did we start? 5:30? Yeah. So we've got another. We've got another bit. I can relax a little bit. So I was going a bit too fast here. But I'm really proud of the fact that the three towers have a connecting garden where affordable and private are connecting. There's been a tendency in the past to kind of separate affordable and private, and that can't work. Long term, it can't work. And then inside the auditorium, inside the lobby of the auditorium, you have this kind of wonderful light and staircases and kind of flowing of terraces around the space, which immediately gives animation to the spaces around it. 2 years ago, we won a competition to transform Smithfield Market. Smithfield Market is for those who don't know, is the meat market in central London. All the markets, Spitalfield, Smithfield, and not Covent Garden, are all going to Barking, which I think is wrong, but that's another story. And this is empty space, and what could Smithfield Market become? And the best idea was a center for the creative arts. Paris, Milan, Berlin all have a place for Frieze, for Fashion Week, for Design Week, for all these events. And London has to build a tent in Regent's Park. So it felt like that was the right place to have a center for the creative arts. And what is wonderful is underneath Smithfield is a car park. Well, actually it wasn't the car park, it was where the trains would come to bring the meat and then to distribute the meat across London. And this space was then used as a car park, and we felt, well, we could also use it for the creative industries. So on the Grand Avenue, we cut this large hole, which was this kind of the big, bold move of this Grade 1 listed building. And then we created in the 4 quadrants place to eat. We were making sure to not forget the past of the meat market, so we were keeping the meat alive. We were preparing spaces for shows, and then as you come underneath the space, you have these wonderful fluted beams and a space for extraordinary exhibitions. And then what is wonderful is that then you have this path that takes you to another space, which is this wonderful spiral that goes up to Bart's Hospital. And we felt, we can connect that space together. And again, we then put a glass roof on it and kind of completely changed the landscape of it and created a sort of foyer to Smithfield Market. And I guess, you know, keeping an old building, changing its use, adapting it to the 21st century, bringing greenery, bringing current legislations in terms of sustainability. All this is about route making. Mayfield is in Manchester. It's an old station that was a kind of Mayfield was when a lot of people were coming to work to Manchester. There was a kind of surplus. There was too many people arriving, so they had to build another station next to it. It was before. It's quite a contaminated site, and there was some kind of printing. So Manchester was a place of cotton and so on, but there was also printing and color printing and so on, and calico printers were on the side doing extraordinary patterns and fabric known across the world. And this is Piccadilly Station, and this was Mayfield Station, and this was our site. And most of the building had gone, but the station was still there in slight ruins in that kind of state. And the competition said explicitly that we had to demolish this structure. And we said no. And we were the only one to say no. And we said we will keep on, because it would cost so much to get some of the qualities of those spaces, and you could never. And so we decided that we will build above it, and we will build a new park in the center of it. And we again looked carefully at the roof of the station. We looked at the underside of the space. This is a 10 meter high space. It's so, I mean, it is a challenge, of course, but it's now where the biggest nightclub it's one of the 10 biggest nightclubs in the world. It's the biggest in England. And it is a wonderful person called Simeon Alfred, who knows how to bring these things together and does wonderful things. And we inherited this kind of culverted river, but it was sort of covered and you could just see bits of it. But there's no parks in the center of Manchester. There's lots of greenery around Manchester, but there's hardly any parks. And so we coined the phrase landscape-led urbanism, which is that you start with the landscape and then you build around it. It tends to be, generally speaking, that it's the reverse. You build something and then you say, we need some green amenity spaces, and we start. But I have to say, it really works well. You start with it. We were very, very lucky because the government was, if a scheme was ready, they could go ahead. So we built the landscape first, and now everybody can see the value and the benefits of the green space. And this is when, as a landscape practice, we kind of got motoring. We had some of the best landscape designers, and they looked at they looked at the biodiversity of the site. They looked at the river. They looked at how to plant trees. They looked at the different uses of the space. They did these wonderful drawings that immediately gave you a sense of the river coming back, the textures, the flat area, the green area, the showcasing area, the relationship to the arches. And immediately, you don't actually, once you've got the landscape, it doesn't really matter. It does matter, but it doesn't really matter if those buildings are average, brilliant, or terrible. That is holding the whole place together, and that's what I mean by landscape-led urbanism. And as the same space that you saw earlier has now a 10,000 seat person nightclub, it has a culture of eating and drinking, and now it's become one of the magnets of the city. And you can go any day of the year, in the winter, in the summer, it's always full. Can you imagine if we had demolished that building? And you would have lost that space. And I don't know any developer that would have paid for that space. It's a really interesting question. And by keeping the architecture, we integrated it with the ground level of the office spaces. We created long avenues, and we kind of worked quite hard to move the structure to not conflict with the existing structure. And then we spent a lot of time with the river and technicians that knew how to deal with that. And this is not a CGI. This is the actual picture of that space. And we kept the old. There were some old beams from the old factory, and we made bridges out of it. And now there is a completely different flora and fauna in this space, and children literally are queuing to play in the playground. So this is a morning mist in the main space. You can see the Mayfield station in the background. And this is the playground that everybody wants to. This is the best slide that crosses the river, and you go at 100 miles an hour out of here, and you've got wonderful play. And this is an aerial view showing the river, the playground, the place where you can do yoga, and then there's different points where you can look out onto. And this is a stone's throw from the main arrival point of Manchester. And so before, when you came out of the station, you would turn right, and now you turn right and you turn left. So, and this is what will happen later. This is future building. This is a CGI of what we've done and what others and us also will do in the future. Balfront Tower it's a kind of we're in the same vein as Park Hill. We're in the 60s. Erno Golfinger, Hungarian, kind of friends and not friends with Corbusier. Also doing his interpretation of Streets in the Sky. But he had a kind of new idea. He had a separate tower for servicing and a tower for residing. And then there was this kind of connection every 3 floors, and from that Street in the Sky, you'd either go down to your flat, up to your flat, or straight into your flat. So every one of these is 3 floors. And in London, when you're driving on the A13, it's kind of an iconic kind of silhouette of the service tower. And he had an intention that there would be places where you could play jazz and you could, do things outside of your home. But first there was a kind of, again, it was nearly demolished, it got listed. Nobody really knew what to do with it. We won the competition to refurbish it. And we kind of reflected on how things had changed from the 1960s to today. So, for instance, flats are divided with kitchens and living rooms, and now today we put the living room and the kitchen together. Why? Because we've got a dishwasher that is silent, and we've got an extractor that takes the smoke of the smell of the fish away. And so you can create a much more open and airy environment today. And so our approach was to say, how would Erno Golfinger approach this if he was still here today? And I felt it was a kind of fair, you respect the past, but you also project what somebody would have done so that you're not completely disturbing their vision. But we had to meet, acoustics, thermal, fire, sprinkler systems, all of this had to be integrated in an old structure. There was a particular, in the streets in the sky, you had a noise of people walking that was above other bedrooms. But the first thing, again, just like in Park Hill, was how do you put the roots back? The landscape and the estate, the social housing estate, had to be reconnected. So we kind of thought about the wider picture. This is the thing about landscape in the 60s. Architects thought they could do landscape, so they would put green spaces, and green spaces was enough. Green space, it's landscape, and it wasn't, and it was terrible because that was Erno Goldfinger's idea of a slide, and it's not. It's like, oh, it's a fort, and children are going to love it. And it was a kind of architect's idea of what children will like. And everything was kind of balustraded and kind of compartmented. And so we kind of, we felt that there was a really important job to do, to have a number of gardens. And I won't go through them all, but there's a sound garden and a hanging garden and a hodge garden and a secondary play garden and a herb garden and so on. And so by being specific about the landscape rather than green space, we transform this space into a rich, flowing environment of landscape, of keeping the existing trees, of creating front gardens, of repairing the playground that was there. And I won't go into too much detail, but you can see how suddenly by keeping the old and adding the new, and suddenly this building it's got a home. It's connected to its landscape, and this was the playground sketches, and all of that obviously was in sketching. So you got the before and after. This is the roof, the future roof. This is the arrival. That was the main entrance. That's how you arrived at the Balfront. So no wonder people didn't want to stay in this building. Whereas suddenly you do this, and then suddenly there's a bit of seating, and there's the smell of the lavender, and you don't have the dustbin next to the main entrance, and there's cobblestones, and there's a clarity of arrival, and suddenly everything is more inviting. And so this was our landscape proposal. I'm kind of making a big deal about that because it is a big deal. The landscape is what kind of brings the whole. The 60s building is again something that has just been, it's an idea. I mean, the really good point is Balfront's sister building, the Trellick Tower, at the other side of London, is the same. It's the same building. So it literally was, I have a building, I've improved it a bit, and I've put it the same building, and therefore the problem of roots. But what was really interesting is then there was tank rooms in all these spaces, and we said, no, we'll put all the facility that Erno had dreamt about: cinema, yoga room, repair room, library, study place, gym, and a restaurant, not a restaurant, a kitchen, and a dining room. So anybody who lives there can have a party of 12 people, cook in the kitchen, and be on the 27th floor of this extraordinary building. We simplified the plan so we worked with Abe Rogers on the plan and the son of Richard Rogers on the plans to create diversity of architecture, and we kept 10 heritage flats so that for those who really wanted to keep things as they were, you could still have the WC separated from the bathroom. We changed the facade, but keeping the key lines of the facade, but we made it slimmer so you could see better from the outside. And this is the before-after. This is kind of English heritage kind of rule that we like to adopt, which is to say, if you squint, you can't tell the difference. And I think if you squint, you can't tell the difference. But deep down, there is kind of really fundamental improvements to the site. And this is still under construction. And then this is the finished building. And this is the kitchen on the right. This is a new terrace. These are the flats. And they are going to be for rent and not for sale. Actually, they were going to be for sale, and now they're for rent, which in a way I think is better. And this is the playground before and after. And suddenly, rather than having a concrete wall around it, we've made it more transparent so parents can see what's happening inside that space. This is maybe of all the rooted projects, maybe it's the weakest. Other than we're in a conservation area here, we needed to create an office building that kind of gradually it was meant to be for the civil service, so it kind of needs large floor plates. So we needed a large amount of area, and yet we had to cascade to kind of make friends with lower height buildings. So we thought about these cascading stepped gardens. Post-pandemic, gardens and outdoor spaces seems to be really quite attractive. We've got the river behind us, and this is a residential tower, just to make sure also that it's not just an office area, it's office and residential on the same site. This is also marking the main sense of arrival from Salford to Manchester on Albert Bridge. This is the connection with Albert Bridge House, with this keeping the existing trees, creating some avenues, framing the law courts, greening the facade, keeping the tonality of bricks of Manchester, and keeping a kind of more civic architectural approach to the law court, so the sort of balancing the two materials, making a connection with the river and making it it was sort of in slightly disheveled, and you can see how the scale of this building talks to the scale of this building, and then gradually steps up to meet the taller buildings at the back of the site. And yet with the slightly green facade and materiality meets with the landscape at ground level, there is a kind of tonality that is also making friends with other green buildings on the edge. The public realm. 2 more projects, 3 more minutes. Maybe I'll go over by a couple of minutes. Bath Western Riverside was a difficult project because Bath is notoriously UNESCO protected city. We're on the edge of the city, we're on the edge of the river, and we were asked to put 2 pavilions. And it's quite difficult to put 2 pavilions because they have a park around them, and therefore there is no front and back, there's no perimeter block, it's a pavilion. And our response was, just so you know where we are, the crescent is here, the big circus is here, both of which we were proud to make people notice are curved rather than straight. And we felt that maybe we needed to put 2 buildings here that were actually, we started with square buildings where we thought we had not a chance. And one of the planning lady said, "Why are you making them square? Our brains are not square." And she went on a wonderful narrative story about why it could be organic, and we didn't have to be asked twice. We kind of then built our narrative of curves. We built our narrative of using local materials and the Romans, and how with a bit of metal in the water, some bits of the baths have become a little bit orange. We went to the quarry where the local stone comes from. We kind of explored how nature can also curve its rock and kind of create interesting forms. We looked at how others had curved stones and still managed to create a sense of fluidity. We also looked at the Georgian architecture of Bath, which is notorious. There is this kind of balcony that isn't really a balcony. It's sort of just a piece of metal that is away from the window, so you can open the sash and kind of look out. But they're not really. They kind of there's a lightness about the balconies, which we thought was important. And that led us to this architecture, which was 2 pavilions. The buildings are practically the same. As I mentioned, there is no front or back. They are both facing. They were the kind of key buildings to mark. There's a Brunel bridge just here, and there was a development along here. And these buildings were meant to be the sort of anchor of the main space. And this was a sort of an approach where we were taking the curves, we were taking the brains are not square kind of theme, and we were curving and curving and curving, so that by stepping back and back and back and back, we were able to kind of get we probably created the tallest building, 8-story building in Bath, and yet because it cascades, when you look up, it recedes and falls away, so it never feels that overwhelming. We made sure that we had strong activity at ground level, restaurants, facilities, and so on. The flats above are surrounding a communal atrium that kind of brings the community together, and people talk to each other. And this is the facade of this is now a gym, and this is now a restaurant. These are the buildings behind. Obviously, all the buildings in Bath are made of stone, and then the memory of the rust on the stone from the Roman baths kind of came into the alcove. So just a very delicate touch of color. And as you see, the balconies again are just like the Georgian ones, just touching the facade and kind of on the edges. And now it's part of the community in the sense that on the race day along the river, this is where it all happens. Last project, I'm kind of fond of it because it was our first main project. It's called Clapham Library. The Lambeth Council said to any developer that wanted to build there, we don't care how many homes you create, but we want a new library and we want a new health center. And they were brilliant at saying what they wanted. This library has to do this and that, and the health center has to be on 2 floors, no more. And then it's down to you and the planning department to get as much height as possible to pay for it. And so it was not a money spent, but the Lambeth gave the site. And that's the building that was there before, Mary Seacole House. Kind of, it's established height, but it didn't establish any kind of sense of belonging to the area. There was a curved building along here. There was low-rise, 2 stories, 3 stories here. There was a new building along here. And this is the site, and you can see how by an organic approach to architecture, you can curve and gently step down to make friends with the low-rise buildings. There was 2 communal terraces. That was unusual at the time. And this has become a sort of important building on Clapham High Street. And the key thing was we thought about the housing, obviously. We made friends with the neighbors as a way of speaking, and then we put this library that is 4.5 meters above ground and 4 meters below ground. And what we wanted, libraries are like the last bastion of a free space. We're in one of them here today. You can come here if you're cold at home. You can come to the library, read the newspaper for free, And so we imagined, it's like if you were in Spain or in Italy, you would be in the village square and you would come together and meet your friends. And the children's library, which this is where all the mums come down the ramp to teach their children to read and so on. And it's also where they have a little chat. And then the books are on the outer surface. So it's a bit like a town square with windows looking out onto the main space. And these shapes on the ceiling are sort of peeled off from the facade and stuck onto the roof, and are like cubist clouds in the sky. And these were early sketches and early models. So you ramp through, you go to the top of the library and you ramp down. So you have continuous books which give a wonderful acoustic to the main space. And so when you arrive in the library, you immediately know where you are. You can go quickly up and down the staircase or slowly around the ramp. The children's books are in the center. That can be taken out. This space can be changed into another completely different space. And it's again a really much loved library. This is the sketch that you saw. It's now become, it was built. It's a 9-meter high space. The residential is above. And then we had £50,000 to spend on art. So we thought maybe if we had the words library in really big letters. And so an old friend of mine, Andrew Logan, who makes jewelry, I asked him, and he built these large letters with mirrors. And what he did is he asked the community to give him little bits and pieces. So children were giving their toys and a golf ball and a little toy and so on. And that became the mosaic that was part of the main fabric. And each letter has a kind of different hue. And every time a child and his mum, or its mum, walk along here, they want to see the toys and they want to stop by the mirror, and lo and behold, they then want to go into the library, which is the main aim. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christophe. That's tremendous. Christophe's very kindly offered to answer any questions. But I just thought, if I may, for 2 seconds, just say, you know me, and I know you, obviously. And so I'd like to return the compliment of giving you a small book with big content. It's 60 years of architecture in Jersey, to say thank you for coming over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased about that. I'm very pleased to have had a chance to talk about roots.
So just by way of technology, I've got this little funny microphone that I'm more than happy to pass around, and we really want to encourage people to engage in conversation, ask questions, make points, so please do fire away.
I wonder, Christophe, what you do think about high-rise in Jersey. You clearly had an idea for it there. It's a controversial subject in the island. I'd just like to hear what your thoughts are about high-rise and whether it can be integrated and rooted in Jersey.
I think that once you go above the general height of other buildings around you, you have a special responsibility to have the highest architectural quality. So, for instance, I never blinked when I saw Renzo Piano's Shard in London. I think that from every angle it looks beautiful, and it really has marked where the station is. So, I think that towers are always, because they're so visible, they are always kind of controversial. And this is my, whoops.
You might go to sleep.
Yeah, this is my granddaughter's hands. So I think that's the rule. Is like it has to be of the most extraordinary quality, and you know where if it's visible, it affects more people, and therefore it's more contentious. But it depends. For me, it depends on the quality, and I think that we were discussing that earlier, that in the past maybe some of the tall buildings in Jersey haven't been of the highest quality, and therefore it's given tall buildings a bad name. I think a tall building could always be a good building.
Josh.
Hi. Fantastic talk. One of the questions I wanted to ask, when you talk about routes for a new scheme, you focused heavily on the landscaping aspect, which was fantastic, but what techniques do you also use, and how much emphasis do you put on connecting with the local community, the actual people that are living in the surrounding areas, and the future tenants?
So I think the first rule we do when we're offered a site or we're asked to look at a site is, what can we keep? Number one rule. So in the instance of Mayfield, you saw against the rules of the competition, we still kind of succeeded. I think then it depends. Some sites don't have a community, some sites do have a community. When they do have, then immediately, as in Caxton Works, we kind of embrace that community. We talk to them. We called our book Framing Serendipity, because by talking to people, we hear and we listen to the history of the site, the people's feeling, the desires, and so on. And as much as possible, we think about how to meet their requirements, as well as the developers' requirement. There's always this kind of to and fro, and then very often we don't know who are the future residents. When we build offices or when we build residential homes, we don't always know who they are. So we build to the best possible criteria of dual aspect, low energy, green spaces, generous balconies, communal spaces, ground floors that are really engaging with the surrounding, and not just a building that is with a fence around it that is kind of for me we want to avoid in a way we also don't want. I like it when affordable and private is mixed together, because otherwise we get the Park Hill of the history was about only social housing in one place, and this is not healthy, because traditionally villages would have had different stratas of society living together, and when we think about building cities, we have to just continue that process.
Hi, Christophe. Josh stole my question, actually, so I'm going to rephrase it slightly. I'm also interested in talking to local communities and understanding their wants and needs. And I'm a Manchester resident, and so I know Mayfield. I know Mayfield really well, and it is a triumph, actually. It's a beautiful space. It's beautifully designed and beautifully detailed. And what I've noticed about it is that nobody has a bad word to say about it. Everybody's very positive about it as a development, which is quite unusual, really, anywhere. And so I wondered, what do you think are those success factors for stimulating the pride in a place that people feel about Mayfields? How can you create that pride in a place?
Okay, so I think that's a really good question. And, architecture is about bricks and mortar and form and shape and apertures and windows and mass and form. But it's also about uses, and I think the magic of Mayfield is in the software. It's the simian who knows how to create a 10,000 people venue, and who knows with very little cost. His background is the theatre, so a bit of light, a bit of fabric, and a bit of timber tables, and this is the best pizza, the best drinks, the best nightclubs, the best, and And so people just gravitate to it. So, and I think the future of architecture, I'm talking to the future of the profession, is going to be, particularly with the advance of artificial intelligence, which is going to shape how we build and how we form buildings. The role of the architect will be curatorial. We'll be deciding between the 50 options that AI has given us, which one is the right one and how the narrative is kind of really working through. But we'll also be making friends with the Andrew Logans and the artists of this world and the developers of the entrepreneurs of this world and the entertainers of this world and the makers of this world to make places. And you know, when I started with the word placemaking, that's really what I meant, is that architecture is not just about my building, it's about, and I don't mean my by mine, but as an architect often we think my building. It's not, it's a community's building, and we happen to be the people who know a little bit how to assemble the complexity of the built environment. So I think software, I don't exactly, I mean, I think we don't, none of us know exactly what it is, but it's some kind of, I think that half or a third of our staff, the 70 people you saw at the beginning of the show, will not be doing what they do today. They will be doing something else, and it'll be more curatorial, more about getting into the nitty-gritty of what goes inside it, the uses, the program.
You know, you started off by talking about your large team and your studio, and it seems from the start that you are not working in this solitary way. You're already listening to, you know, 80 different perspectives, and so you're naturally coming up with a much more rounded, sympathetic, better result. And I think that's one of the key things for me, who's very interested in public realm and society and communities, is the impact of collaborative working, which we know is not easy, and many people struggle with it. But I think that's, for me, one of the great successes of what you're doing, and why it works so well. Does that?
Yeah, and that's why we don't call ourselves an office, but we call ourselves a studio. This is why we sit in the middle so that everybody can come to us. And it's also probably why we're only 70 strong and not 400 strong, because David and I and Lucas and all the directors know every little talent that is in the room. And can you do that drawing? Or can you deal with the fire escape and the double staircase in this tall building? Can you deal? And we know if somebody bought Studio Egret tomorrow, it would fail within a year. It's not for sale, by the way, but because nobody would know like the directors know, like the associates know. And the studio is also about, I jump on this project, I work on this project, so everybody's working on a multitude of different projects and kind of enriching it in that way. So yes, you are right. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, we've got a question from Kevin here.
A lot of your schemes seem to be quite rich because they had a variety of uses. So they had a mix of commercial uses, residential uses. Can you just explain a little bit about how that came about? We don't have a very good history in Jersey of having mixed use schemes, so generating that vitality and placemaking.
I think that's. I think it's a bit historical that in England, in London, it happens all the time that this is the shopping quarter, this is the entertainment quarter. It's like a kind of simplifying urban life by clustering everything together. So you have a financial quarter, the square mile, for instance, and I think new urban thinking is always moving away from that kind of, the city is dead on the weekend, the city is dead after 9 o'clock, and residential spaces can be dead during the day because people are working. So mixed use is a no-brainer. If you want to create rich urban fabric, you need to kind of mix the use. The thing is it's more difficult. It's so much easier to put a shopping center here and to put just residential here and put offices here. And when you bring them together, they don't always make friends, because if you have, often I've wanted to put residential above offices, but then you need 4 stairs coming through, and then you ruin the efficiency of the office. So then you have to decouple them, and then so you have to be kind of clever urbanistically. But I think that that's what, practically every project that we do, we look for the anchor, the kind of the library or the health center or the nursery or the bar or the venue or so on. And imagine Canary Wharf if, instead of putting all the public utilities below ground, had put them above ground. Imagine if, had I been the planner at the time, I would say, you can go 3 stories above your 50-story building there, but you give me a free 3-story library at ground level, a free swimming pool, a free theatre, and then suddenly Canary Wharf would have been the most extraordinary place. Instead of which, it was Canadian architects who thought it was going to be freezing and put everything below ground. And so you walk through there, and it's getting better now, because over time, things kind of move on. But for 20 years at least, in my memory, it was a kind of a place not to go to. Now you can start to go to, but it's taken a long time. It's taken a long time to find some roots.
I think we've got time for perhaps one more question.
Can I please ask how many problems you had with planning laws? Did you fear that a lot of things needed to be changed, a lot of rules? And how flexible should that be handled?
How flexible should the planning system be, is the question.
Yes, in that sense that the populace can really determine whether things stay as they are or can change. I experienced the other day so vividly how a lady in a public hearing was defending her landscape that she was used to. She didn't want something to happen with it. So how is that?
Okay, so I think I understand the question, and I guess the issue is every time you have a planning issue, there will be detractors, people who don't want it in their backyard, who don't want to change, who don't understand the process. A city to remain, or a town to remain alive, needs to change and evolve all the time, and the role of the planners is to look at the bigger picture, and there will be always some lone voices. I'm sure you know about that really well. There will be lone voices who see the harm from a very personal point of view, but they can't see the bigger picture. So we do need a higher authority, like the planning department, particularly if they are flexible and open-minded, to kind of see the future good of a development. And at the same time, you also do have to listen to all the other voices, and you have to make compromise. And sometimes you started with this scheme, and then you adjust it to respond to what you've done. And I think that the future of artificial intelligence will actually help us to find the better solution, because it will project better. But I think that, and some planning departments work much in, I can tell you some boroughs in London are moving backwards and some are moving forward, and it really depends on who's leading it at the time. Manchester has a kind of nearly, I don't know, maybe you can help me on this one, but it's like there's a few people who make key decisions, and they kind of really drive projects forward in a way that is, I think, has seen the transformation of Manchester in extraordinary ways in the last 25 years.
Thank you, Christophe. Most importantly, well, perhaps not most importantly, but thank you to everybody here for coming. I have to admit, I was asked to let you know that you were being filmed, but they didn't say whether I did that at the beginning or the end of the talk, so I'm doing it now. So apologies for that. And just also to say thank you to our sponsors, Creative Island Partnership. These films are becoming available on YouTube, so we're trying to assemble a kind of legacy of learning for everybody to enjoy. And our next talk is on the 28th of September. We've got Emily Allchurch coming to talk to us. She's a local but internationally acclaimed artist. And so, not another architect, somebody different, but do please tell your friends to come along and join in. And thank you again, Christophe. It's fantastic.